your background. I mean, how does someone get into studying ketosis? So I'm sure our audience is thinking the same.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll take a step back. In my undergraduate, I studied nutrition and biological sciences with the intention to go to medical school. And also kind of with that in mind, I wanted to do some research in a lab, and I chose to work under the research dean of Rutgers University. And she was doing some fascinating work on the neural control of autonomic regulation. So how our brain responds to low levels of oxygen and adjusts cardiovascular and respiratory output as a function of oxygen, you know. And studying, it gave me the opportunity to study neuroscience, but also studying the physiology through which our brain controls. So, you know, how our brain controls our respiration. So that gave me a pretty good foundation in sort of medicine and understanding some things. And I had the background in nutrition already. And then my postdoctoral work was actually working with the Office of Navy Research and working on the other end of the spectrum, which is not low oxygen, but what happens when you're exposed to high pressures of oxygen in the context of using a oxygen rebreather, which is really specific to Navy SEALs and the special operations community. Because when you're using a rebreather underwater, the advantage is that there's no bubbles. So it's there's a stealth component to using this technology. But one of the drawbacks is that you're breathing 100% like pure oxygen in a closed circuit rebreather. And a major, you know, drawback, a disadvantage is that you have the potential for seizures.
Right.
If you need to go deep, if you're taking on fire, you want to evade the enemy, you go deep with this instrument, this equipment. Breathing high oxygen is a stimulant to the brain, you know, and in that way it can be used sort of therapeutically for different disorders with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is about 2.5 atmospheres max. But if you go down farther than that, in terms of atmospheres of pressure, then the overproduction of oxygen-free radicals disrupts brain energy metabolism in a way that triggers a seizure. And a seizure underwater could be fatal, and it's going to end the mission for sure. And it's you know, if we could lift this limitation, then we could make, you know, the physiology of extreme environments much more safer, and we can increase the capability of the warfighter. And understanding this could also enhance and increase the capability of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, because the protocols that are used now, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy can be used, there's 15 FDA approved applications that, you know, your insurance will cover it. And then there's a lot of off kind of label applications of hyperbaric. But the limitation of the pressure is CNS oxygen toxicity.
So is that where ketosis comes in? I mean,
yeah.
They can tolerate more. Explain that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going towards. So oxygen toxicity is a tonic-clonic seizure of CNS. And the military has spent a lot of time and effort looking at things like antioxidants and anticonvulsant drugs. But to get the efficacy of an anticonvulsant drug, it needs to be used in a dosage that's essentially sedating. And you don't want to sedate a Navy SEAL and send him off to a mission where he's got to die, right? So in the process of looking at the cellular and molecular mechanism with all the tools we have in the lab, I realized that this is the breakdown in brain energy metabolism was really what was leading to the seizures. And I just kind of stumbled upon the ketogenic diet because I was searching, what do people do when drugs fail for seizures? And I saw that the standard of care for drug refractory epilepsy, drug-resistant epilepsy, was the ketogenic diet. There's also, you know, vagal nerve stimulation, but the ketogenic diet had a remarkably good track record. And when I pulled all the literature and I spent a few weeks reading it, I was really blown away. I was like, this is a grossly underutilized metabolic therapy that had tremendous implications.
How many years ago was that you started researching it?
I discovered it like in 2008, I believe, and I actually knew some people around me. One of them is Mike Dancer. Actually, he was in Europe at the time and connected with me. And I recommended that he try it because he was going to have brain surgery for temporal lobe epilepsy. And it literally almost like cured his epilepsy. It stopped, you know, he went from being homebound to having, you know, his life back again. And I just was reading, you know, one paper and one report after another, and I contacted the program officer in 2009, I believe. And within a year or two after that, I was able to, you know, write up a proposal and dig up enough information and kind of get all the logistics in place to run an actual study in the lab. So about 2010, I was really full force in the lab, running seizure studies, looking at the mechanisms of oxygen toxicity. So the program officer at the time was not really interested in the ketogenic diet because this, using a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, the low-carb diet, I could kind of get them on board with that. But when you talk about a high-fat ketogenic diet, there was a little bit of pushback, and it was just like, well, can we achieve the same elevation of ketones? You know, the ketones seem to be playing a neuroprotective role. Can we do that? Can we circumvent the diet and develop a ketogenic diet in a pill? So in parallel to our ketogenic diet research, I was also working on developing various forms of exogenous ketone supplements.
Taking ketones.
Yes, and esters and ketone salts. And we would develop these things and then test them individually to find out which ones were most potent and which ones had the greatest potential for therapeutic efficacy. And there were a few particular ketone esters that had the most anti-seizure, anti-convulsant effect relative to some other things that we were trying. And they are the substances that we've been focusing on and advancing their kind of use, you know, as far as safety, toxicology, pharmacology. We're doing all this work for the FDA and tracking them as a medical food for very specific neurological disorders, but also for the special operations community, where they have like first choice or first dibs, if you will, of the highest potency ketone products. And then these are more synthetically based or synthesized ketone products. And then there's naturally derived ketone products like ketone salts, like a mineral salt. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and even various amino acids can be bound to ketones, namely beta-hydroxybutyrate. Mm-hmm. And these can be developed in a way that's somewhat palatable and formulated with powdered medium chain triglycerides. You know, right. So we're testing these things individually, and now we're in the process of formulating them together to get a balanced electrolyte, you know, and amino acid formulas. And you got to do that. What looks good on paper does not always pan out in the person's stomach. So sometimes, or their palate. So you got to formulate it in a way that tastes good and formulate it in a way that's tolerable to your GI. And
we have a lot of questions about exogenous ketones, meaning ketones you take as opposed to going into ketosis. So before we even get there, because that is some of the questions that we had, and we had a lot of people write in about you know, exogenous ketones, probably knowing that your name was connected to you know, studying some of these. You know, I think it's interesting that you work with these. I mean, right now, I don't even know if we can say where you are. You know, can we say where you are right now?
I'm in special operations, community.
Right. Special operations.
At a base right now. So yesterday I couldn't connect because I was, you know, kind of the signal would be scrambled.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I mean, you're working with all these special ops, right? I mean, it's whether it was the SEALs, the Rangers. I mean, so I mean that's really an amazing interest because they're obviously seeing the benefits of ketosis. Now, Dominic, you saw the benefits of ketosis beyond even seizures and neurodegenerative conditions. You know, as we did in our world. You know, dealing with people with unexplainable illnesses and realizing that, wow, I mean, ketones have a major effect on so many different conditions. Why is that? Why is ketosis such a powerful tool?
Mm-hmm. I think there's numerous reasons for that. We know from, you know, a decade or I'll say a century of basically almost a century of using the ketogenic diet for drug refractory epilepsy. And etiology of epilepsy is largely unknown for the most part for most forms of epilepsy. But what we do know is that there's aberrant neuronal activity. And you could say, that, impaired brain energy metabolism is really pathophysiologically linked to pretty much all neurodegenerative or neurological diseases, right?
Yeah.
So the data was pretty clear that when a person gets on a ketogenic diet, numerous pathways, I would say there's 20 off the top of my head really, that are kind of brought back into homeostasis. So if your GABA level is low and your glutamate is high, if you have excess reactive oxygen species, if your certain brain energy metabolites like alpha ketoglutarate, succinate, malate are low, the ketogenic diet is what we call anaplerotic. It actually feeds into the Krebs cycle and elevates these Krebs cycle intermediates. Alpha ketoglutarate is actually a precursor for glutamate. And glutamate is actually converted into GABA. And GABA is an inhibitory sort of neurotransmitter. It maintains neurological homeostasis. So the ketogenic diet does some key things. It converts more of a neurotoxic substance or signaling substance, glutamate, which can be neurotoxic at high levels, and it shuttles the excess glutamate to GABA, which kind of makes us feel calm.
Yeah, glutamate, just for the watchers, is the most excitatory neurotransmitter, whereas GABA is the most inhibitory. Am I right on that?
Yes.
No, so, and just for the people watching, we have doctors and public watching, look, what you're saying is basically it brings balance to brain chemicals. It brings balance to energy, and how, the matter of fact, it improves cellular energy, which has an effect on all these processes, how your brain works, how your metabolism works.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying. So it brings homeostasis, balance to basically every process in the body that can drive inflammation, which obviously causes a lot of diseases.
Yeah.
So it downregulates inflammation and brings balance to these chemicals. Is that simply?
Yeah. That's perfect. That's much better put. You hit on a couple good topics. So by restoring brain energy metabolism and these intermediates, it also feeds into the production of neurotransmitters,
right,
which also is put back into balance, and neuroinflammation too. So we looked at a variety of neuroinflammatory or just systemic inflammatory pathways, and many of these are suppressed by nutritional ketosis, specifically by beta hydroxybutyrate. We have a Nature Medicine paper showing that
just so people listening, beta hydroxybutyrate is the most abundant ketone that's formed. So when we break fat down, we make ketones, and beta hydroxybutyrate is one of these ketones that we make that we know makes the brain work better, turns off genes, etc.
Yeah, that's right. And when I got into this in 2010, the signaling properties of metabolites, specifically ketones, were not even discussed, really. I mean, we just understood ketones as an energy metabolite, something that could more or less replace glucose as a brain energy fuel. And now you have, a science paper showing that it functions as on gene expression. So there's, it regulates through epigenetic regulation. It can enhance our antioxidant capacity. It can have a profound effect at decreasing inflammatory pathways that are chronically overexpressed in age-related diseases and even many cancers. So we're looking at, a dozen or more different signaling pathways that ketones are working through, and not just, it's much more than just a metabolite. And so our research is going in that direction, and we're also using what's called metabolomics. So we'll collect blood and we'll collect tissues from animals that are on a ketogenic diet, but also on ketone supplementation. And we can look at all the metabolic pathways by looking at the metabolites. And we have a firm understanding specifically of kind of what's being altered, what precursors are being generated from being in nutritional ketosis. And that gives us greater insight into the benefits of ketosis. And of course, there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies interested in this data because if they can identify specific things that are being regulated by the ketogenic diet, then they can make a druggable target. And I can just tell you that the big pharmaceutical companies have contacted me and they want to know, I mean, they're not even shy about it. They're like, how can we create, you know, what are druggable targets of the ketogenic diet? Like, can you come to our institution, our facility, and give a talk and, you know, and just on all the different pathways that we can create drugs for, because we realize that this has tremendous therapeutic potential. So how can we make this into a drug? And it's going to be hard because there's a dozen or 20 or more different major pathways that are being altered kind of synergistically with nutritional ketosis.
I mean, Dominic, when we look at, you know, cultures in history, right? I mean, you know, all of them utilize ketosis at different parts of the year. The Hunzu people, I mean, we can go down the history. You know, ketosis is something the body's naturally goes through. And I don't even, you know, I just want people to understand listening, because people listening have different things, energy problems, you know, conditions, weight loss issues, I mean, hormone issues. You know, Dom, what you said is so key. It's like ketones go up. Okay, they stabilize glucose and insulin, which is, I mean, how many diseases right there does that affect, including anti-aging, right? So that's a benefit, but it turns off bad genes. People that are watching this, a lot of, you know, things that your genes are expressing is why you don't feel well. And you've made dietary changes, you've made a lot of things in your life. However, these genes are still turned on. So what you're saying is ketones go in and turn off those switches, literally change what our genes are expressing. And Dominic, that happened to me. You know, when I was in ketosis, you know, several times, I know, like, I had certain chemical sensitivities, genes were turned on, certain pathways. I felt them, I watched them downregulate, and I know it was the ketones just turning off those switches. So that's amazing research.